Hi, everyone. Welcome to Simplicity Unchained, which is the first out of three of our summer schools that we're doing around product management and product ownership, where today we'll focus on simplicity for features. Um, and I hope to inspire you and give you some practical tips today to achieve simplicity in your products. So for today, you will learn about the 10 rules of simplicity as they can be found in a book by John Maeda, and we'll dive into them very much. And then how to apply these rules to sort of real world problems that you might face in your product. And then some examples of those product simplifications that you might find useful. My name is Jesse. I'm the co-founder of Triggre, and I mainly focus on product and marketing. I have an MSc in software engineering. I have been the co-founder of three different SaaS companies, of which the first I started at 19 while I was still in university. And with these companies, I have serviced customers ranging from enterprise all the way through SMB. So I think I know quite some different things about serving customers. Now, for today, if you have any question, we will have time for Q&A at the end. So if you go into the event on LinkedIn here on the comments, if you leave a comment, then it will show up for us and we will pick it up towards the end of this presentation. So that feel free to leave a comment and we will pick it up at the end. So let's get started with the laws of simplicity. Like I said, this is a little book by John Maeda, which I find is a very helpful way to think about how to apply simplicity concepts to, in this case, features, but it also applies to other things. These are the laws, so we'll go through them quickly, and then I'll go for each one in depth. First law is reduce, which says that the simplest way to achieve simplicity is through thoughtful reduction. The second law is about organizing. An organization makes a system of many appear fewer. You can imagine that probably very easily. The third is time, and savings in time feel like simplicity. Then learn. Knowledge makes everything simpler. Differences is also an interesting one, I find, is where we look at how simplicity and complexity need each other. Then law 6 about context, and this is a tough one. So basically the description is what lies in the periphery of simplicity is definitely not peripheral. Now that's a bit hard, but it concerns mostly around focus of your user. So if you keep sort of the concept of focus in mind, it will become very clear. And then emotion, this is one of my favorite ones, actually. I think that's most overlooked by people designing products, is that more emotions, as they say in the book, are better than fewer. I would argue that definitely you have to design for emotion. Law 8 is about trust, and that sort of that simplicity creates trust with users. And then one very interesting one is that some things can never be made simple, and we'll look at some examples of that. And finally, it wouldn't be complete, a book about simplicity that doesn't describe one sort of final law to summarize all the others into one simplified rule. So let's get started with the first law. Again, it's about reduction. So the simplest way to achieve simplicity is through thoughtful reduction. And you can think about this and the way that Mondrian started painting. Maybe you don't know this, and you probably know his paintings, like the ones that he became famous for. But if you're ever in The Hague, not for a NATO summit, but for something else, maybe you want to visit the museum there where they have a lot of these paintings. You can see sort of his progression through time. And Mondrian started painting a tree, this tree, in sort of a more expressionist way, more like Van Gogh-like. And he started reducing it to more simple shapes. So here is a shape where he's changed obviously the colors, but also already sort of trying to find minimalize the lines. The strokes are different to sort of find what the core of the shape is. He then further abstracts or reduces the shapes and the colors, which ultimately lead him to find these sort of more geometrical shapes in it. And I think that the interesting thing here is that the reduction really goes through a couple of steps where it actually takes away from the original image, but it does still convey a nice dynamic. I think that's because of the bases that it uses, the tree. And obviously, finally, this is his final work, the Victory Boogie Woogie. He's known for these primary color line drawings that he sort of abstracted, and you would not guess that he started off with a tree. So this is a reduction, sort of step-by-step reduction, and I would argue that you can't easily get there in one go. And I wanted to give you an example where that actually was in one go, and this is from the early 2000s. This was Alta Vista, the then predominant search engine. So we're living in the dot-com boom back then. I was in university and everyone was using Alta Vista. And along comes Google, which says, you know what, we can do this simpler. And basically, they reduced everything to just this screen. So this is Google from around 2000, 2001, where they just had the search bar, Google search, I'm feeling lucky, which is just a funny button where you could immediately go to the first result that it would get. And that's it, super minimal. None of all the links and the things that Alta Vista had. It's just all the way down, reduced to its core searching. So I find that always to be a very good example of reduction, thoughtful reduction, I would say, because they do keep all the core things and still have a funny option like I'm feeling lucky. Then the second law, organization. So organization makes a system of many appear fewer. For example, I will not say that this is a real image that I took of my desk, but let's say that a desk can look like this. Many papers stacked or other things. And as soon as you start organizing them, even though it might be more items, they will appear to be more organized. And sort of through that being more organized, they will be more simple to sort of to your user. So a really good example of something like this in a product is how I organize my email. And I've here I have a screenshot of how my inbox folders look. I have a to-do, which is where I put items quickly that I need to follow up, but maybe like later this week. Awaiting a reply is sort of like, yeah, I need to reply, but not really have to like actively now do something. Read, actually, there's a rule in my inbox which puts everything where I'm in CC, and I'm thinking I'm spilling some beans here now that people might abuse, but if I'm in CC, I figure I'm not the main recipient, so it moves into my read folder. Then I have a Confluence and Jira, because obviously these are systems that we use, so notifications from those systems go in there. What's your trigger is a simple thing for similar email, service desk emails, and Zapier messages also go into a separate folder. So this is how I sort of organize that. And this makes it simpler for me to work with it just because it's more organized. Law 3, about time. So savings in time feel like simplicity. And I think we can all relate to being stuck in traffic, or, having, we take the shortest route and it's very busy. And we can take a longer route and it might just keep moving and it will get us there faster. And that's sort of saving in time as opposed to having to wait for things and everything. That feels like simplicity. So I have an example, which is just a theoretical one. So you'll see 2 progress bars, and I want you to look at, or sort of like go down to your feeling about, you don't know what's going to happen, but you know how quickly it goes, and feel which one feels simpler and which one feels more complex. Okay, ready? Here we go. that takes long. So for me, even if these two things would sort of do a similar task, it would feel that the top one is simpler just because this bottom one is still not done with doing the task. It feels more complex, even though graphically they represent the same thing, right? So if you can make something faster or appear faster, then it will feel simpler. And I think that's a really good one to sort of take into account for, especially for product design. There's many little tweaks that you can do there where, for example, by showing a progress bar already for something that takes a little bit of time, even if it's an indefinite rotating circle, but it will convey to the user that things are being done and it feels simpler than when it takes longer. So sort of the perceived amount of time that it takes, making that shorter is a really good way to make it simpler. And then law 4, learn how knowledge makes everything simpler. If you look at this item that I show you here, I think that everyone who's watching this will understand how to use this and finds it actually a super simple tool. I mean, it's just a screwdriver, right? But if you put this in the hands of, let's say, a 6-year-old who has never used it before, they have no clue how to use it. And that's just simply because they lack the knowledge of, for example, which way to turn, what item to use it with. So because of the knowledge that you've gained, for you, it's a very simple tool. But if you don't have that knowledge, it is suddenly a very complex object that you have no clue how to use. And here we have a really good example. Actually, I took this from gaming. And you can, if you ever like, I'm a big fan of sort of like the creating the world and the creativity that goes into it. But there's also a lot of systems underneath games, the sort of the game systems, and they need to be usually explained to users. So here's a screenshot of this is, I think, literally the first scene of the new Doom game, and apart from it looking pretty good, I want you to look at the interface, so the HUD, so to speak, the heads-up interface. So on the bottom left, you see a thing with a mouse there and a button. So it shows you that you can right-click and do something. So you can try that out. And that's basically all the information it gives you. And then there's also left click. So that's basically it. Relatively simple. But as the game progresses, the people who built the game, they want you to sort of have good control over far more complex games. And there's this thing in games, which is the game loop, which is sort of the way that you have to play the game. And they try to teach you that. And this is very different for different games. It's a very interesting topic that you can get into and talk about a lot. But the game loop is a thing where you do different actions, and if you loop them together, that sort of determines the pace of the game. So in the latter part of the game, take a good look at the HUD again. This is how it changes. Now suddenly there's a lot more things. I can press the R button, I can press the E button, I can press the V button, I can press the F button, and all these things these are just the things that I can do while I'm playing. There's still a bunch of other things in the menus. On the top right, suddenly there are some things that I've gathered. So all these concepts have been explained step by step. And so when you're playing, right, you gain that knowledge step by step. And then at the end, it doesn't seem so complex. Whereas if we would dump the user immediately into this complexity, it would feel very hard for them to understand what is going on. So this is a pretty good example of how you can sort of build knowledge. And through that building of knowledge, you make things simpler. Then we are here at law 5 of differences. And I think the differences are very interesting. So simplicity and complexity need each other. And you might think like, oh, but isn't it nicer if just everything is just simple and like complexity is gone? Well, maybe. So this is a pretty complex shape, right? It's not just a simple circle or a line or something. It's sort of just a bunch of things stacked together, like how wires are in a drawer, for example. But Suddenly, if you see the complexity that it came from, it is a big difference. Now, this shape seems simple, but it only seems simple if you understand the complexity that it began with. And from this complexity, you gain this simplicity. So this is why complexity and simplicity always need each other. They need that contrast because otherwise there's no simplicity, right? Think back again at the game example that I gave you. The, the complexity at the end needs the simplicity sort of that feels simple at the end, but it also needs sort of you understanding it to be complex. Otherwise, it's just very simple and it's just that. So sort of that there's a based over time going from a complex situation to a simple situation, or at least knowing the complex situation versus the simple situation, is very imperative to whichever thing you make to be experienced as simplicity. Otherwise, it will just become the new base point, the let's say the new starting point for from which to simplify, which is good. Just take that into account that they always need each other. So an example that I have here takes me back to my university days, where my professor told me that in his university days, this is a long time ago, in his university days, I think as a PhD student or something, he's a computer scientist, right? So he had written, and we're talking about like, I think this is like the 70s or something. He said that he wrote an AI that could play chess. Now we all know that only in 1999, arguably, Deep Blue beat Kasparov at chess, who was the then world champion. But he claimed in the 70s or something that he had written that, and he asked his professor, "Professor, come and play. You need to see the level of chess that we have been able to make." So he gets his professor to sit behind the computer, right? And the professor starts playing chess, and he's having a really good match, and he's like, "Oh my god, this is so good! It's almost like I'm playing against my colleague. This is the level that it makes, because he would often play with his fellow professor." And so the thing that they did was actually they hooked up his computer to the computer of that colleague and gave the colleague the same story that we've made this super simple program that actually can play chess. Now they're impressed with that simplicity of sort of the program being able to play chess, and they think, wow, this is fantastic, because they know the complexity of the problem, because everyone at that time was trying to make like chess, playing things. This was a big challenge back in the day. Nowadays, we don't think about it anymore because it's been solved and it's super simple. But you need that understanding of the complexity of the game to understand sort of the simplicity that the solution gives you. And then after chess, we had Go, which is essentially it's a very complex game. And then once the solution is there, it might seem simple, but you need to understand the complexity that it came from to value the simplicity of the solution. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense, that you do need those two always together. And then the toughest one to explain, which is what lies in the periphery of simplicity, is definitely not peripheral, law 6. And again, like I said in the beginning, think about this as focus, right? So think of focus as the difference between a light bulb, which illuminates the whole room, like I have here now, right? I have my lights. So you can't see them, but you can see that I'm well lit. Whereas if I would have a laser pointing at me, it would be super sharp focus, but you would probably only see a red dot somewhere on probably my shirt or something. So that's the difference between focus and illuminating the whole. And this is best shown by an example where in Triggre, so I'll show you from our product, we have this system of red dots to shift your focus from what you are doing right now to something in the periphery. So you're focused on something that you're doing right now, and we need to shift your focus to something in the periphery that is not peripheral at that time, because it would prevent you from publishing your application. So we need to draw that focus. So we need to illuminate, sort of widen your view. Here's how we do that. Let's say that you are building something and you're working on this part. This is our data designer. You don't need to know sort of the details of how it works, but this is the data designer. And there's an issue in another part of the application, but because we make things simple, we show as few options as possible through thoughtful reduction and all these things. But now we're at this point where, because of the complexity that is sort of hidden below the surface, we need to show you something, and it's important because it won't allow you to publish your application before it's solved. So we have this little red dot. So what I would do now is this draws the attention to that thing called flow parts, and the user will click it. If they click it, they go to that screen and they see another red dot. So now the attention is drawn to that one item. And if they click this item, they see here that, hey, there's a thing missing, right? And then they can click that and solve the problem. So this is how we can think about putting things, sort of drawing focus, sort of shifting between focus and illuminating the whole area, drawing focus onto things that are important, but you don't want to sort of clutter your screen with. And you see similar things in like undo actions, the little pop-up information items, and these are things that are very important to consider when you're designing a user experience, when you're designing a product, when you have something complex that might not be immediately available. This is how you can think about that. So think about shifting focus to the important part without maybe putting it fully in screen, but guiding the user there. Then, like I said, my favorite law, because I think it's mostly overlooked, is the law number 7 about emotion. And it says that more emotions are better than fewer. And one of my big inspirations is Norman Foster. And maybe you know him, maybe you don't. But this is one of his most iconic buildings. This is the Swiss Re headquarters in London. Also called the Gherkin because it looks like a pickle, basically. And there's this documentary where he talks about how he designed his buildings and stuff. And he goes, like, I always try to start with the emotion that people feel as soon as they enter my building or they see my building. And I thought that's a very interesting thing, because you would think that the construction or the shape or other things are super important, but he really starts thinking about, what do I want people to feel, like the awe that they see or feel? How do I convey that into what they see, hear, the expression sort of that the whole surrounding brings to them? And another really good example, I think, of that, where he really outdid himself, is this is the Reichstag in Berlin. And this is the Bundestag in Germany. So this is their democratic center of the country. But he had to convey the significance of history, because through the Second World War, the Reichstag was mutilated, and there was a lot of rebuilding and everything. And so he had to make the dome whole again, because that had been blown off. It had to be repaired, and so they did this retrofit project, which really takes cues from the original sort of fabric that is in there. So the layers of history, sort of, they cleaned up walls and everything from all of the repairs and the things that were done, to reveal things from the past, such as even stonemason marks from way back in the day, but also the Russian graffiti, the scars that have been preserved there, sort of, and they really made them come alive as a living museum. And in other aspects, it's a radical departure from that past, because they made this dome to really reflect the transparency that they wanted in their in their democracy and the modern era. So I think that it's worth a visit if you're in Berlin. It's a really good combination of those very difficult to match different times, different emotions, and if you open yourself up, if you're walking through it, it really opens you up to many of these emotions, takes you back to the past. It's a really good experience. So I think that designing for that is very important, and it's really hard to translate this into products. But there's one company who does that very well, I think, and that is Apple. And I'm not talking about Apple of today, but I'm talking about Apple when they first brought out the new iPhone. And back in the day, the iPhone was revolutionary. We forget about that because it's so long ago, but it was revolutionary because it had a single button and a big screen for the time. Big screen. It was tiny compared to today's screens, but a big screen. So what they did is they were like, well, if this is our core like thing that people like, this multi-touch screen, we need to make it show and have sort of people be filled with awe, have that experience when they start interacting with the product. So what they did was they designed a box, and this is the first time that this was done, to my knowledge at least, where sort of a feature in a product was so prominently positioned in the unboxing of your product. So you get your product. Normally, it would be like, okay, there's a bunch of things in there, manual, some cables, wires, you name it, and it was not as nicely presented as this. For those who still remember, it would be like there would be two pieces of styrofoam wrapped around it. The cables would be on top. Like, it was just presentation-wise, nothing to be really impressed about. And Apple was like, no, we need to make this screen center stage. So they really designed a box around that emotion, and people open it and they see this iPhone with the main unique selling feature right there staring at them. It's only a screen. Back then, every other phone had a little keyboard, right? So this is a glaring feature right there, and they take everything away, reduction, that can take away from that experience, right? So this is how they maximize that emotional feeling where you open it and you're like, wow, this is different. This is new. This is the future. So I think this is a really good example to take that into account. Like, how can you play with the emotions of people? How can you show that things are simple, that they're beautiful, that they're nice? Which emotion do you want to design for, and link it to a feature in your product? Law 8, trust. In simplicity, we trust, which basically says that if something is simple, it feels trustworthy. And here I have this is a real menu of a Chinese place. It says Chinese, but they have Singapore and things, and this is how it goes. It's basically Asian, it's Thai, it's everything, right? So if I see a menu like this, I have to admit, I get scared. I don't know, what am I going to choose? Is my choice going to be correct? So I have no idea what I should take and whether my choice is going to be correct, if I'll like it. And the opposite of this is the following menu from an Italian place, where you can get some pizzas, you can get some toppings that you can add, and that's it. And this is a super simple menu. Now here I go like, look, maybe I want to eat vegetarian. I'll have the margarita, right? It's like you can have it very simple, just seasonal veggie. So they have a couple of options, and then you choose. You can add some toppings. It's simple, far simpler than the other menu. So it makes me trust my own decision far more than the previous menu. Right here, I go like, oh yeah, I definitely made the right decision. Now, when my business partner and I go out for for dinner, and then this would still be about half an hour decision for us because we're pretty bad at it. So we now always just go like, look, if you have a chef's menu, just send it out, right? Just do that. That's probably the simplest way you can approach it. But this is a very good example of how you can make a menu and sort of make the options appear very simple, even if maybe all of the combinations are still as many as you saw on the Asian menu. Now, I want to remind you, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the comments. We will pick it up at the end, so don't worry. It will come along. This brings me to the example for trust. When we were designing our platform, so this is going to be an example from Triggre. We had this issue where we wanted to have a data model that you build to sort of make sure that you identify which data is stored in your system, right? And it looks like this. But for some use cases, a list of items would be better than a graphical representation that you see here. We didn't want to add another button because we were like, yeah, we want to get as few buttons as possible. So how do we add that screen or the functionality of it without adding complexity? And we started digging into when you use these things. Now, the visual representation is very strong for when you want to remember things in terms of systems like parts that belong together. There's lines that connect things. And a list view doesn't have that. But the list view is very handy when you search for something, right? You know it starts with an O or it starts with a T. So I go through that rough area. I can scroll there. So what we did ultimately is we combined these two views. So when you start searching, and you can start searching in our platform by just typing, then we switch views. And here's how that looks. I'll have two searches in a row. So first I'll search for one word, then I'll escape back to this view, and then I'll search for another one. Take a look at how this works. So in this way, we combined all these things without adding too many buttons. Now, the search button is a button that we already had because we use it in different ways based on context. But allowing you to search and then showing a list of items, which you might say like, hey, but the by order doesn't have the product. Yes, but it's linked to a product. This is why it's later in the list than the other ones that have the name of product, sort of the word product in it. So this is a very simplified way to show these both views without having to add an entire second view. Now, I'll have to admit, underneath it is a far more complex way that we have to work with this. It's far easier for us to build a list and a graphical representation than a graphical representation which can morph into a list and back. But this way, you do feel that these items are the same items, right? This animation shows you these are still the same items, but they're just shown differently. So this is a way that you can think about that, how you can make these things simple without adding extra features. And then law 9 about how some things can just never be made simple, right? So there are things that are inherently complex. And I'll give you one that these days we all use, and that's stuff for AI. Now, at the basis of computers are still transistors, and transistors, this is going to be a really short history of how computers are built. Transistors are just things that can be either 1 or 0. This is the basis of all computers. And with these transistors, basically they either they have a couple of inputs, like an input, and then they either go 0 or 1 based on the inputs. So you can have these things combined into these switches where you say like, look, if these two inputs are both 1, then the output is 1. If one of them is 1 or both of them are 0, the output is 0. That would be an AND. And you can get complex like that. And this is how the computers are built. And So layer upon layer upon layer, these things are built, but the computers are still as complex as they ever were. Arguably, they're far more complex today than they ever were before because we added on stuff like parts of your processor are now turned off to save power if they're not used, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's incredibly complex. You cannot make that simpler. That's just a complexity. Think about it the way that our brain is. Like our brain is inherently complex. Nature is complex. Some things cannot be made simpler. Now, the way that we perceive it, the way that we use it, can be made very simple. So AI, these networks, these computers that are underlying them are super complex, but the way that we use it can be made very simple. You type a prompt, it gives you an answer. That's a very simple way to use it. And it really, I would say, an alternative way to think about this is abstraction. So it really abstracts away from the complexity. And the further you abstract away from the complexity, the simpler you can make it. Google does the same with their search bar, right? It's just a search bar, but you don't see all the complexity that is behind that. So think about it like that, maybe as an abstraction away from the complexity so that you only see the simplicity in how to use it. And then finally, simplicity. The one rule is simplicity is about subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. I think if you stick to this one, you'll sort of find yourself really going along all these other rules that they're for very specifics. But if you have to think about it in one go, this is really the one. Subtract things that are obvious, right? If something should not be there, take it away. It's obvious for you. You don't have to have it. If something has meaning for the user, then add it. And this means also in time, right? So make sure that you subtract things that are at that time obvious, add them at the time that they are meaningful. I think that is probably the simplest way to think about simplicity. That concludes for now today's session. Now we have more coming up. I hope you found it valuable. If you do, please leave a comment about it too, because that will always help us. You can also follow me on LinkedIn to get notified as well. And you can subscribe to our mailing list to get invited for the other ones. And we'll also follow up with some extra in-depth material. We have some book tips. We have some other things that we'll share with you through the mailing list. And we have the other sessions. The current one, obviously, is June 25th. We started at 11. I hope I was exactly on time. We talked about feature simplicity. This is how designing them. The next one is on July 23rd. It will also be movie themed, but I won't reveal what it is yet. I think you can see it on LinkedIn already. But we're talking about feature valuation, like discussing what value features have and how to determine them. And then in August, on August 27, we're going to talk about the feature lifecycle that you can use. So please sign up, and I'm going to check whether we have a couple of questions. So I'll go through these. If you have any yourself, please do write them in the comments. Here we go. Have you ever regretted simplifying something too much? Regretted is a strong word. I wouldn't say that I've regretted it, but I think we've definitely overdid it sometimes, where you go a step too far. And I think that's okay. I think that it's a journey, not sort of an end point. So you basically go, you simplify and then go too far. Actually, this is one of the ways that we look at it from our product development. I would say from our product development strategy is we say we build minimal viable features. So our backend can, for example, do a whole lot of things, and then what we expose to the user might be very limited. And then we try to see how many users sort of look sort of beyond the edges of what it can do. And then we sort of stretch it out. Whereas if we would expose everything that we would be able to do, then maybe that is too much. But once it's in there, you can't easily simplify it further because people might be using it or be used to it, etc. So you get into all these other problems. So that might be a good way to think about it. We build features and then build out slightly to the edges, maybe one side, maybe the other, to make sure that we don't sort of make them too complex. So that can be seen as sort of a determined sort of oversimplification. Yeah, but regretting it, no, it's no, I've not had that. I can imagine that you can do that, but then it's always something that you can reverse. Let's see. Elena asks, can you share a personal example where simplifying a feature led to higher user adoption? I think I can. So back in my first company, which built this point of sale system, we had orders for suppliers that you could make, and one of the things that we built there was you can order stuff, and then it would have to be obviously it would have to be added to like so you order like a can of paint and this brush and thing, and it had to be added to one order to one supplier. So what we had was that you could select the things that you wanted and then add them to the order and then send the order, and that was like a whole process for that. So we simplified that to saying like, look, you just want to have everything that's out there for order for that supplier just automatically sent at this specific time. So we gathered everything, automatically sent it. And you could sort of say in the settings that, the supplier needs to be supplies every Friday, for example. So we need to send it on Thursday. You could still overrule that by doing it manually. And I think that simplification of having it automated did actually lead to some customers going like, oh, this is a very interesting feature. We'll use that more now because it now sort of runs on autopilot. So that's maybe a really good example of how we simplified, or sort of the perceived simplification of, you only have to order it and the system will handle the actual order being sent out. And that definitely was something that allowed more people to easily use it. We have one more question by Daniel, who asks, which of these principles do you find the hardest to apply in real product development? That's an interesting one. I would say the one that I find it most interesting is also the hardest one, the emotion one, because it's something that we're usually not aware of, our emotions, I would argue. So, for example, for our product, we use very few colors, and all the colors are very functional. We use very few shapes to simplify that. And the whole idea behind that is sort of like we want to allow a user to feel that they're in control and that they understand the process very easily, even though it gives them a lot of power to build stuff. So I would say the emotion there sort of like is very hard to quantify, right? And it's very easy to throw it out and to sort of say like, hey, we'll now use this one other color or this other thing, or we'll do this for that, and then it's gone. And arguably, it would even not be very easy to then see that it has changed. So I think really designing for emotion is probably one of the hardest ones to do. And I would say that if you manage to do it, it's a really big feat. That's what I think. If you manage to really hit the emotion that you're looking for, I think that is really good. And in that sense, I think some of the nicest feedback that we've ever gotten is from people saying like, look, I work with these like business processes the whole day, and then what I really like is that like if I have an afternoon of time, I just use Triggre and I quickly build something that feels so simple and so quick and so easy. And I'm like, okay, that's really cool, because then that's really what we set out to do. So I think if you can really get that from your users, so ask for that feedback, then I think you've really achieved something very good. I think that that was the last of our questions. So thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you sign up for our mailing list. Follow me and Triggre on LinkedIn. And we'll be back with the next of our summer school on July 23rd at 11 CEST, where we talk about feature valuation. I hope to see you all then. And otherwise, you can review this one, at least on LinkedIn. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions that pop up later. Thank you so much, and see you next time.